Hey naval v'lo chacham. In Haazinu, Moshe Rabbeinu is describing how honest, upright, and straight HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. And he says, Hatzur tamim pa'olo, the rock whose work is perfect, ki chol derachav mishpat, all of his ways are righteous, el emunah, a God of faith, ve'ein avel, and there is no perversion in him, tzaddik v'yasharhu, righteous and upright is he. However, when it comes to describing HaKadosh Baruch, the Jewish people, there is a little bit of difference in the way Moshe Rabbeinu describes it, and that Klal Yisrael often does not see or perceive HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his true nature. He says, Shiches lo lo, banav mam dor ikeshuv satol, that there is destruction, right, that is not to him, meaning the destruction that the Jewish people suffer is not from God, it's from their own misdeeds. Their children are blemished, a generation that is bent and perverse. Right? And Moshe wonders, Hala Hashem tigbaluzos, is it God that caused this? Am naval v'lo chacham, it is a disgusting nation that is not wise. Halohu avicha konecha, did not your father, meaning God, acquire you? Hu ascha v'chonenecha, he made you and formed you. Right? How did you manage to deny all the goodness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given you and mess it up so thoroughly? Right? Chazal asked the question in the Sifrei on Parshas Haazinu. Mi garam Lisrael lios menovalim ומטופשים, who caused Israel to be so disgusting and stupid? Va'onim. And they answer. Chazal answer their question. Shelo huchekmu b'dveri Torah, because they didn't become wise in the words of Torah. Right? The Torah Tamima explains this Chazal. Mi שעוסק בתורה ולא יבינהו לאשורו, someone that learns Torah, is involved in Torah, but he doesn't understand it in a straight way. Ahuu navol yibol, he will be disgusting and continue to be disgusting. Ki ein קיום לעסק כזה, there is no establishing, there's no thoroughness, there's no everlastingness to such involvement. And on this it says, Am naval v'lo chacham, a disgusting nation that is not wise. וסבת הדבר שלא חכם, and the reason is because they're not wise. שלא התבונן להבין יפה דברי Torah. They did not think about it in depth to understand the words of the Torah. They cut things out. One of the most common things that people do, Orthodox people do this, Reform people do this, conservative people do this, non-Jews do this, is they take the Torah and they show how it says exactly what I want it to say, right? When you approach the Torah, the approach has to be, what is this saying? Not what do I want it to tell me, right? But what does it actually say? It's very interesting. In Rav Steinsaltz's introduction to the 13 Petaled Rose, the first book he wrote when he was very, very young, about 22 years old, I believe, he's saying, people say this about the Kabbalah and people say that about the Kabbalah. Let's see what the Kabbalah says about itself, right? What is it actually saying? And this is something that people have a very big problem with. They want the Torah to give their message, not look at the words of the Torah and see what is the Torah's message, right? If Klal Yisrael would learn properly and understand the Torah as the Torah meant us to understand it, right? We would not come to be in a disgusting situation, right? Therefore, the Torah goes on, Yebinהו goes on, Zechor Yamos Olam, remember the days of the world, meaning of old. Binu Shnos Dor V'Dor, understand the years of each generation. Shalavicha v'yagedcha, ask your father, and he will tell you. Zekanecha v'yomer lach, your grandfather, and he will tell you. Right? It's interesting. The Rav also uses the phrase, Rav Kook, naval v'lo chacham. Right? He's disgusting and not wise. Shelibo arela, Rav Kook writes, his heart is uncircumcised. Shelo tam lihitnaseil meromei higion hakodesh. He has no taste, no desire, no understanding of how to be elevated to the holy meditations. V'lo chash me'olam noam or ahavat tzur olamim. He never had any feeling, ever, of the pleasantness of the light, of the love of the former of worlds, of the one that created all the worlds, right? Such a person, right? It doesn't matter how much he studies Torah, it doesn't penetrate him at all, right? There's the old thing, he's gone through Shas, has Shas gone through him, right? You know, and this is very much true, right? That in terms of Ahavat Hashem, someone that's naval v'lo chacham is incapable of fulfilling that mitzvah, right? I mean, it's really an onus rechmane patre. He's exempt because it's an incapability. It's whatever it is in his makeup. It's something he's not capable of. Therefore, Rav Kook writes, Ish naval v'lo chacham kazeh, a disgusting, not wise person like this, lo yuchal la'achin et hara'ayon. He is not capable of encapsulating the idea. Ki elu haga'gouim harabim hapratim hanasi'im shebit Shir HaShirim. These desires, these many desires, specific ones, that are raised up in the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. Hem rishamim shel ha'otzer haganuz b'nefesh klal ha'umah. They are the hints of all those things that are hidden in the soul of the nation. Asher bachar lo Hashem lishmo ulezichro. That God chose for his name and to be his remembrance, meaning those that this is how he wants us to remember him in this world, in these fashions of love. Nonetheless, mipnei she'eno margish klal shum chesron, but this person, this chamor la'ava, this donkey of love, is incapable of feeling any lack in the fact that he doesn't have these feelings. Behipaked makom elo hargashot, that when he is thinking about his feelings, doesn't feel there's anything missing. It's all there. Asher lo yadam, because he didn't know them at all. Right? The person that doesn't understand and is incapable of understanding that there can be feelings of love of God, right? Or let me say it more generally, that there can be feelings of love, right? He's only a self-centered creation, right? Mm-hmm. He can't express them. He can't feel them, right? And because he can't express them or feel them or understand anyone else's expression or feeling them, he's completely and totally unaware
that he's lacking something.
That there's something missing, right? So for such a person, it is absolutely impossible for him to learn Shir HaShirim. Right? It's just an impossibility. It can't do it. And therefore, this aspect of Tanakh is completely missing to him, right? And since the depth of Tanakh is missing to him, right? Mm-hmm. Everything's gone. Everything becomes a pure perversion to such a person. Wow. When he translates Shir HaShirim to himself, he ends up with pornography, right? Which is how it can be understood. That it's very clear there is such a level to it, right? But he's never incapable of seeing anything more than that. And with this, Rav Drukman jumps to Bikora to Mikra. There is a type of science, right? The whole field of science today, a whole field of study, which in the academic Hebrew world is called Bikora to Mikra, or in English, biblical criticism, right? And it looks at Tanakh from an aspect of the removal of God from it. That's the first thing that biblical criticism does. And when you look at Tanakh, you read it as you read any other book, any other type of literature, right? You examine it like you examine a popular novel, right? Or a classic novel, I don't care. It can be Jane Austen or Chaucer or Shakespeare or whatever, right? It doesn't matter. It's not what it is. Rav Tzvi Yehuda Zitzal would not call it Bikora Mikra, he'd call it Mada HaMikra, the science of Tanakh. And he said it came out of two aspects. One was amaratsis, ignorance. The other was sinas Yisrael, of hatred of the Jewish people. One of the most classic example of biblical criticism is the idea that it says in Yeshayahu Hanavi, Perek Memhei, Ko Amar Hashem L'Mashicho Koresh. Yeshayahu is said to his anointed one Koresh. However, there's a problem with this pasuk, because at the beginning of the Navi, it says Yeshayahu prophesies Bimei Uzziah Yotam Achaz Chizkiyahu Malchei Yehuda, in these kings, right? These four kings, and they were 200 years before Koresh. So the biblical critics say there wasn't one Isaiah, there's two Isaiahs. If you do not accept that there is a God, then of course Yeshayahu, that's living in the times of Malchei Yehuda, cannot conceivably be giving a message to Koresh that will live in another 200 years. However, if you accept that God can tell Yeshayahu to give a message, right? Let this message be handed down through the generations to Koresh, right? It's perfectly reasonable that both of these things can be in one sefer. If you could say similarly, look at Haazinu, right? It talks about future things. So obviously it was written in stages. No, Yebinהו is prophesizing about the future. And there was, I don't know whether it still exists, a monthly publication called Tachkemoni. And Rezev Yavitz wrote an article in it in the second issue, so this is probably going back to the 30s, called Habikoret Kashehi Mevukeret. That is the biblical criticism when it is subject to criticism. So he's going to critique biblical criticism. And we're going to look at a few of his critiques. So one of the most famous of the biblical critics on Yeshayahu, where Yeshayahu says, Mi bikesh zot miyadchem ramos chatzerai. Who asked this of you, literally from your hands, to trample my courtyards? Now, the critic said, you do not trample with your hands, you trample with your feet. Therefore, he said, the pasuk should read, Mi bikesh zot miraglechem. Who is asking this of your feet? Ramos chatzerai. This is an example, Rav Tzvi would say, of the amaratzis, of the complete and total lack of understanding of the language of Tanakh, and therefore you come to ridiculous conclusions. There is another similar one by a different biblical critic, and it's in Vayikra talking about the karban offered by a poor person. Vimlo sagia yado deisei, if his hand cannot afford a sheep or a goat, ve'avi ashamo asher chata, for the sin that he sinned, shtei torim, he will bring 2 torim, or shnei b'nei yonah, or 2 torim and b'nei yonah are both types of pigeons. I cannot tell you the...
Torah is a dove.
That's a type of pigeon.
Is a pigeon.
A dove is a type of pigeon.
A Torah is a turtle dove.
Okay. So it says shtei torim. However, this very learned professor understood shtei torim as there is another word that is used occasionally in Tanakh and throughout Chazal for tor. And what is that? An ox.
Mm-hmm.
So he translated it, if he cannot afford a bird, a sheep or a goat, then he will bring either 2 oxen or 2 turtle doves. Again, he didn't what was it? What was the other one? What did you say, translate Torah as?
Turtle dove or pigeon.
So pigeon. So these are the pigeons.
B'nei Yonah is a pigeon.
B'nei Yonah should be a dove. I don't know. Whatever. It doesn't matter. When the Mikdash comes, you will all learn how to identify them. Especially at Elliot here, because he has to offer them, and they're offered at different stages in life.
Mm-hmm.
The third example that Rav Drickman brings from this article is from Sefer Amos. Ko amar Hashem, thus says God, al shlosha pishei Edom ve'al arba lo ashivenu, for 4 sins of Edom, and for 3 sins of Edom, and for the 4th I will not forgive them. Al radfu becherev echav, that they pursued with a sword their brethren, v'shiches rachamav, and they disgrace rachamav. Let's leave that for a minute. V'trof v'adapo, he tore up in his anger. V'evreso shamra netzach, and his fury against him he kept forever. He never come down from it. So this person translates shiches rachamav, that he performed a hysterectomy. Rechem is a womb. Shiches is to destroy. So he destroyed the womb, very obviously. L'rachem can also mean to have compassion on, meaning that then what the Navi means is they did not have compassion on him, right?
But it's his womb. You can't destroy man's womb because man doesn't have one.
Oh, well. So Rav Yavitz explains that the source of all of this Bikurat HaMikra is because of stupidity and not fluent in the language that they are reading, or their refusal to accept that there is a divine origin to things. We said the way you see something depends upon your outlook toward it. If you do not approach Tanakh in the right way, it's impossible to understand it properly. And I'm going to go farther. If you have not understood Tanakh properly, you cannot understand Midrashei Chazal properly. If you have not understood Midrashei Chazal properly, you can't understand the Mishnah properly. If you haven't understood the Mishnah properly, you can't understand the Gemara properly, right? Everything starts with your nakudat mabat, your point, your outlook, and it grows and develops from there, right?
So you're compounding the problem.
But if you don't start in the right place, and Tanakh is the center of everything, right?
You have no dysfunctional foundation.
Dysfunctional foundation. If you build a building with a bad foundation, the building falls down, right? I mean, so the foundation of all Torah, in the broader sense, is Tanakh, right? One has to understand Tanakh properly to go on and understand everything else. And the way we approach Tanakh is critical, right? We have to understand it first and foremost in the appropriate way. And only at that point is it possible to go on from there. All right. Next week, we start a new section in the Hakdama to Shir HaShirim.